I have long been coherent of the division among black men and women, and that people have suggested the only answer is dating someone of another race, but no one is addressing the issue, so I'm going to address the issue. The one thing that is synonymous between black men and women who choose to date interracially is that both state they are treated better by other races. So it stands to reason that black men and women simply need to learn how to treat each other better, putting away foolish ideologies that we've learned from movies, music, and propaganda. This information will be both historical and biblical, providing reasonable arguments and actual confirmed testimonies of slavery, as well as giving back black people their true history and culture before America. It should also be stated that I am not racist and do not prescribe hatred towards any people, but only wish to see the unification and preservation of our people. Before I start, I want to state that what has aggressively taken place in today's society, a term I've coined the European bee theory. The African honeybee is known to be very productive and aggressive. What bee farmers concluded to do was to remove the African queen bee and replace her with the European queen bee, which would result in the other bees becoming less aggressive and manageable. By replacing the African queen bee with the European honeybee, this in turn would cause the killer bees to be more submissive, or in other words, neutralize a lot of the aggressive behavior associated with killer bees. I have concluded this strategy to be taking place today in the form of music, media, cartoons, and whatever vehicle our people gravitate to. Examples of this would be black leaders of influence, male or female, placed with a white spouse. Others include the introduction of bisexuality, drugs, and weed addiction. These are all direct influences from celebrities. Similar tactics were used on Black Panthers and the black community. The government purposely pushed heroin and crack into black communities to destroy the black family, although the boundaries can now be seen all over the United States as well as in other countries. In this video, I hope to provide historical and documented history pertaining to slavery, seeing as it has been discontinued in school systems, which otherwise would not be taught to our young youths. My intentions after having presented this information is to unify the relationship between black men and women. During the 70s, the feminist movement really took flight. It took the idea of black power and changed it to woman's power, and rather than moving the black communities out of poverty, it destroyed the only weapon black communities had, the black family. Black women then put away race issues being unified with black men and took up the oppression that white women faced with their men. Even though black and white women joined to address issues for women, there never was a sisterhood between black and white women, quoted from Sister Shirazat Ali. This later would have an impact on the way black women carried themselves. Dresses became pants. A teen mind state became a rebellious one of arguing and disrespect. What was taught to be acceptable attire for a woman was now obsolete with the excess of freedom. Women began to dress more lascivious and provocative, and as a result, that trend has continued into today. What once was a reserve for your husband became open for all to see. Respectable mothers no longer passed down sound morals. Instead, provocative women could only pass down that which they knew. These ill effects prompted a drop in the standards for women. You no longer had to be married to have children. It became acceptable to have children out of wedlock. The government offered subsidies that would allow women to get by, but with hidden stipulations. These subsidies were not accessible if there was a father or a male figure in the household. This further contributed to the destructive, independent mind state of black women, further destroying the black family. The government literally introduced division into the black family. Around the same time, the Tuskegee experiments were taking place, purposely infecting and killing black men. But this group was too small to effectively eradicate the entire culture. It was at this point that the government realized that the destruction should be focused on the black woman first. As it relates to the Bible, The serpent didn't go to Adam first, but to the woman, and through Adam's wife, he became deceived. Feminism has been a very useful tool at this because it was a complete brainwashing used to tell the black woman that she was oppressed by the black man. But what black women didn't realize is that there was no way for a black man to oppress her. Black men did not control anything that could oppress her, i.e., jobs, banks, loans, education, etc. Feminism successfully conned black women to quit viewing racism as their enemy and start seeing their own black men as their oppressor and enemy, destroying their own families in the process. There has always been a constant strategy to keep black communities divided. In doing so, drugs were sent into black communities to purposely destroy the family structure. Through media, the goal has been to destroy the positive image of black men in the eyes of black women. Examples of this on a subconscious level can be seen in movies like For Colored Girls by Tyler Perry or The Perfect Guy. The goal of these movies is to portray positive black men as the worst men to have. So if a good black man comes along, more often than not, black women would be sure to reject them, while the music industry promotes the wrong type of guy to have. This contrast in comparison to movies with white men who are renowned as the ideal man, the good father, the accomplished man. It has long been a tactic since slavery to divide us based off color. One slave was put against another. What should be noted is that white slave masters raped many Negro women against their will and produced what is referred to as mulatto children. Oftentimes, these children may have gotten the privilege to work in the house while darker Negroes would work harder jobs in the field. These two statistics, along with the idea that being mixed would somehow make you superior to non-mixed Negroes, can be attributed to the rivalry among light-skinned and dark-skinned slaves. We now have to take this into consideration and stop hating one another based off of skin complexion, no longer viewing beauty as being the lighter the better, but viewing black as being beautiful regardless how dark or light the hue. Other current strategies being used on our people, and especially the youth, is the homosexual agenda. One of the reasons for this is 2 women or 2 men cannot bring forth a child, and when you bring gay marriage into the picture as planned and accomplished by the New World Order, these couples have become neutralized of bringing forth offspring. Another current strategy being used is what's referred to as soft genocide. This theory consists of breeding a race of people out of existence by interracial mixing. They then take the least desirable of that population and have them procreate with the desired race. In this case, undesirable white men get the choicest of black women, and black men get the undesired and often overweight white women. This is accomplished by communication to the subconscious through music, movies, and TV shows we see. But the Bible clearly states that we should not mix with other races. Deuteronomy 7:3. Neither shall you make marriages with them. Your daughter you shall not give unto his son, nor his daughter shall you take for your son. And as for descendants of slave masters or whites and others as we know them today. Joshua 23:12-13. Else if you do in any way go back and cleave unto the remnant of these nations, even these that remain among you, and shall make marriages with them, and go in unto them, and they to you. Know for a certainty that Yahuwah your Elohim will no more drive out any of these nations from before you, but they shall be snares and traps unto you, and scourges in your sides, and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from off this good land which Yahuwah your Elohim has given you. As stated, it does not say that it could, it does not say that they might, but for certain. Just because someone has children, marries, or sleeps with you does not mean they are not racist, as it should be understood that slave owners have always lusted and raped black women, and as racist as they are, it did not stop them from screwing black women, as it still is to this day. For hundreds of years, black people have been taught through the media and personal experiences that white is the greatest thing you can be. From marrying white to the ideology of woolly hair being bad hair and fine hair being good hair, of course attributing to white people. Because of this constant idea that white is superior being put in your head, it has caused our people to form self-hate. This, along with Jim Crow and white privilege, have led black people to the idea of make it on the white man's terms. So it goes to reason, if we view white as a standard, we begin to emulate those who we admire. So a black woman will wear blue eye contacts, dye her hair blonde, perm and straighten her hair in an effort to compete with white women for the acceptance and affection of white men. Similarly, black men with status, houses, corporate jobs, or a man of means will view success as being synonymous with the possessions of a white man. If white men drive an Audi, I must drive an Audi. If they drive a Mercedes, I must also. If he marries white, I should marry a white woman also, as it would be the closest I can be to being white, in an effort to fit in and distance myself from my black background. In short, they equate success with being white. None of these actions have proven to be productive for us, and it would be in our best interest to unite among each other in all things, loving and supporting one another instead of hating and competing with each other. The white image of Jesus. This can be a touchy topic for some. Most will argue that it doesn't matter what Jesus looked like, but they don't understand the psychological impact behind it. Bring up a black child viewing an image of a white Jesus promotes a subconscious identification that white is good. If all you see is white cops, white businessmen, white luxuries, you will subconsciously view white men as being God on earth and hold them to that esteem. This is especially true for black women who will uphold and defend white men before she will ever for a black man. The white image of Jesus is no other than Caesar Borgia. Google both Caesar Borgia and Jesus together for proof. And as for the description of Jesus, the Bible tells us his color. Revelations 1:14-15. His head and his hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine bronze, as they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. Bronze burned in the furnace resembles dark brown. Woolly hair is like that of the Negro. Jesus is not white, nor has he ever been. Our true identity revealed. So what is our true identity? The Bible has the answer. More than just some religious book, the Bible is our history. So get your Bibles out and follow along as we unveil our true identity. Revelations 2:9. I know your works and tribulation and poverty, but you are rich. I know the blasphemy of them who say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. The white Jews, as we know them today, are impostors of us. So what color were the people in the Bible? Jeremiah 14:2. Judith mourneth, and the gates thereof languish. They are black unto the ground, and the cry of Jerusalem is gone up. This states they were the color of the ground, that being dark brown. Job 30:30. My skin is black upon me, and my bones are burned with heat. Songs of Solomon. I am black, but calmly, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tent of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. Look not upon me, because I am black, because the sun have looked upon me. My mother's children were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyard, but mine own vineyard I have not kept. Lastly, Joseph, son of Jacob, was sold into slavery to the Egyptians by his brothers. They would later come into Egypt because of the famine, but when they seen their brother Joseph, they did not recognize him. This is important because we understand that the Egyptians were an African race of people, and therefore Joseph looked black as well. These are but a few examples found within the Bible. Moving forward, Genesis 15:13. And he said unto Abraham, Know for a certainty that your descendants shall be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them for 400 years. Our Heavenly Father tells Abraham that his descendants will sojourn away from their land and be afflicted for 400 years, paralleling with slavery of black people today. Because some may be confused, I will go further and use the Zandervan Compact Dictionary. When we look up the name Ham, it reads, Ham, the youngest son of Noah, born probably about 96 years before the flood, and one of 8 persons to live through the flood, he became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. So we now see that we were not Africans, nor have we been. We are Hebrews of the Bible. Africa has been a land of refuge, but it is not our motherland. Israel would be our motherland, but with larger borders. Deuteronomy 28:68. And Yahuwah shall bring you into Egypt again in ships by the way of which I spoke unto you. You shall see it no more again. And there you shall be sold unto your enemies as male and female slaves, and no man shall buy you. The first time we went into Egypt was to escape the famine in the land of Canaan. It should also be stated that we became a nation in Egypt, but later was forced into slave labor. This is the first slavery before the Exodus led by Moses. The second was being brought to America. So how did we end up in Africa? Luke 21:20-21. And when ye see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter therein. This is referring to the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in 70 AD. To escape persecution, our people fled into Africa by the millions, gradually migrating towards the west coast of Africa, of which our ancestors were captured and forced into slave ships and brought to America, including other countries. We are descendants of those slaves, and we are the people in the Bible. Your true identity is Hebrew. We were allowed to be sent into slavery because our ancestors broke the laws and the commandments of our Heavenly Father. Now pertaining to slavery. During the time on the plantation, slaves had wives but were not recognized by plantation owners without clergymen. Oftentimes, slaves were forced to procreate to create more stock, that being slaves, for more laborers. Many slaves refused to do so, not wanting to subject their children into the harsh and rigorous labor of slavery at a young age. Some, upon protesting, consented to celibacy, while Negro women who were raped against their will used tactics such as taking certain herbs or chewing on the root of cotton plants as a natural contraceptive to prevent childbearing or cause miscarriages. Men and little boys were also sexually abused by both white men and women. It was not uncommon for a slave owner to rape or turn out a female slave, including sleeping with a married Negro woman. Many Negro women were whored out and had mulatto or mixed children by them. Upon raping a female slave, slave masters would whip them, and each time they would resist to rape, she would be whipped again and again and again until she realized, after seeing no hope, resisting, with her back torn by the whip, would give in to his evil, lustful desires. White men today no longer need to force black women because they are now delighted to be raped in their comfort. The term gator bait comes from the diabolical deeds white men would do with the Negro babies. 3 or 4 weeks after a Negro woman gave birth, she would be sent back to work in the fields or whatever task she was assigned. In the process, she would have to leave her baby under a tree nearby. Sometimes younger female slaves would unreliably oversee the child as the mother would work. Slave masters would then sneak away with slave babies, including toddlers, and throw them in a cage kept near the swamps. They would then proceed to use these Negro babies as alligator bait, wrapping a rope around them and tossing them into the swamp to be eaten alive by alligators. They would then drag the alligator to the boat and hit it in the head with an axe, dragging it back to shore, and proceed to do this 3 or 4 more times a night. The one-drop rule. Slavery in the United States encompassed wide-range rape and sexual abuse. Many slaves fought back against sexual attacks, and some died resisting them. Others were left with psychological and physical scars. Rape laws in the South embodied a race-based double standard. Black men accused of rape during the colonial period were often punished with castration, and the penalty was increased to death during the antebellum period. However, white men could rape Negro women slaves without fear of punishment. Men were also sexually abused by slaveholders. Racial purity was the driving force behind the Southern culture's prohibition of sexual relations between white women and black men. However, the same culture protected sexual relations between white men and black women. In 1662, the Southern colonies adopted into law the principle of partus sequitur ventrem, which meant the slave status of a child depended on the status of his or her mother. Miscegenation, or the one-drop rule, which implied if someone had 1 drop of blood or 1/60th of nigger blood, they would be considered Negro. This was a departure from English common law, which held that children took the status of their fathers. This would then state, "You are what your father is," as stated in the Bible, although you may take on either parent's attribute. Numbers 1:18. And they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the 2nd month, and they declared their ancestry by their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the numbers of the names from 20 years old and upward individually. The one-drop law simplified and supported the actions of white slave masters raping and sleeping with Negro women. Later, the term mulatto would become synonymous with being someone of mixed race. Other terms, such as passing for white, were considered to be someone not of Negro ancestry whose features were less pronounced and could easily be assimilated into the white race. Housing. For the housing of the Negro slaves, the male would have to go to the swamp fetching his own logs and having to haul them back to build a small hut. Some huts did not have roofs, while others may have but had an opening for smoke to escape. These huts did not have a chimney or stove, and oftentimes were void of any furniture and consisted of an empty space. Families of slaves would have to sleep on the floor together. During the hot summers, in an effort to ward off mosquitoes and gnats, a fire and smoke would be used in the hut. To give you a better picture of the severity, slave masters would sleep in the comfort of their homes with finely knitted nets placed over the bed so mosquitoes could not get through. The clothing of slaves consisted of poorly made garments that often would not last, but only through the preservation of which slaves could come up with. Negroes were given 2 sets of clothing, one for the summer and one for the winter. Some children during hot summers could be found playing naked. Food. Slaves were very seldom given any kind of meat as provisions. They would be given provisions at the end of Saturday night, and it would have to last them until the following Saturday night. Some of the meal provisions consisted of corn, potatoes, rice, and cell-less portions of rice. When slaves did receive meat, they would receive 1 fish, a mullet, small portion of beef, in the course of maybe 1 to 2 months. They were also given entrails and blood of a hog or pig, which tradition has been passed down to today and can be recognized as those who consume chitlins today. Slaves had to prepare and cook their own food and only ate 2 times a day, although being in the field since daylight. Breakfast wouldn't be until 11 a.m., and dinner not until dark, when you could no longer see after a long day of labor. It was not uncommon for a slave to be beaten for a crime in which he did not commit, so bad that his flesh was beaten to a jelly. Negro women were beaten to the point that slave masters would leave splinters in their back. To make the whipping more torturous, slave masters would rub pepper, mustard, or vinegar into the lacerated open wounds. Female slaves could be found with what was referred to as nigger plaster, salt, pepper, and vinegar tied to a post and then whipped completely naked. Slave masters would then go to church and upon returning continue to whip the nigger girl. When a northerner asked why he would do such a thing, the slave owner replied, "If I had whipped them on any other day besides the Lord's Day, Sunday, I would have lost a full day's work. This way, by Monday, they should be recovered enough to work." Other forms of torture consisted of whippings with knotted ropes, iron branding or deep flesh wounds for identification, beatings with a paddle, tar and feathering, lynching, castration, and amputations. Heavy iron or wooden collars would also be used to make work and sleeping highly difficult. During punishment, slaves would be stripped naked, whether male or female, and purposely be punished in front of everyone to subconsciously cause a mind state of fright and hopelessness. As a result, many female slaves would train up their offspring to be submissive to white authority in an effort to avoid them being tortured. Other occasions of punishment. Punishment was not different from non-religious whites to those professing religious status. One incident describes when a Negro woman was accustomed to standing slightly stooped while the pastor was giving his sermon. The white pastor then commanded the Negro woman to sit down, but she replied she had been given orders by her master, as it was customary to their plantation that she should stand. Not adhering to what the pastor commanded, he came over and began to beat her upside the head with the very Bible he was reading from. It should also be stated that Negro women were also beaten on the head with canes, slapped across the face with shoes, raped against their will, and could be treated just as bad as the men. Even if she was pregnant, she was still beaten. It was also not uncommon for slaves to be stabbed or shot for the slightest thing, even when they were not in the wrong. Black brothers and sisters, this is your true history, in part with addressing some of the issues that keep us divided. I hope that you take heed to the information presented, and if you would like a copy of the statements of this letter, leave your email below and feel free to share this video. Black women, love and respect your black men. Black men, love and respect your black woman.